Welcome. My name is Reiko, and today we're going to be talking about AAC and emergent literacy. This is a session that's specifically for parents. So I've taken out some of the more assessment-y stuff and just more like what you can do at home kind of stuff. So my name is Reiko. I'm a speech-language pathologist with the North End School District, but I've also worked in early intervention. I teach out at UBC. I've sort of been around and I do all sorts of things. I also run an AAC summer camp. And I've been doing that since about 2022. If you haven't seen this already, we do have like a sheet with QR codes of helpful QR codes that you might also find helpful. If you want this, I can email this to you afterwards as well. So we have a YouTube channel that this is actually going up on. We have an events page, we have like troubleshooting, we have Instagram, we have all sorts of ways for you to connect with us and get information from us. Because I work part-time, Kim, my colleague, also works part-time, and so it's a little bit tricky sometimes when neither of us is around and you need some information. So we've put some stuff out there for you. Like I said, we have an Instagram. I do put things in highlights. I don't know if you're familiar with Instagram, but like if you're on touch chat, there's a highlight specifically for touch chat. We also have a YouTube channel. We do organize things by playlist. And so as a follow-up to this sort of like intro to emergent literacy, you might go onto our emergent literacy playlist and get a little bit more information about like the kinds of things we're doing at school. But again, we're talking about things you can do at home, which is not necessarily the same thing as what we're doing at school. And that's totally fine. And I think you need a little bit of everything. So you don't necessarily need to go look that up. I also started a website. It's www.reiko.aacslp.com. And you can't organize YouTube very easily. And so I've started a website to sort of more, I don't know, I can organize links and videos kind of all in the same place that way. So you can also find me there. Okay, so just a little bit of background in terms of what we're talking about here today. Why is it important to teach literacy to AAC users? So, sometimes when we talk about high schools and stuff, we hear about things like life skills programs. And if you know Shelley Moore, she is a sort of like a speaker around inclusive education in BC. And, all the teachers in BC know her. I once saw something where she said, life skills are kind of like 50s housewife skills. And yes, they're important, but they're not the most important, right? When we think about life skills, literacy is actually the most important. Because when we think about, students taking the bus on their own, they can only take the bus on their own if, yes, I need them to be able to tap their compass card and that kind of stuff. But that's actually the easy part, right? What I actually need for them to be independent is to be able to look at this and say, yes, I need to take the 96B line. I'm at the right bus stop, but then also read the number on the bus that says 96B line. And then also sometimes you have a little additional sign on the bus stop and it says, the bus is not stopping here today. Please go around the corner. That is actually the really most important thing I need them to read. And if they can't read and navigate that and sort of troubleshoot that, then it becomes really difficult for me to be able to say, yes, they can be independent out in the community, right? We also have signs all over the place that are, this one has a little bit of a symbol there, and it is universal, but that also takes literacy skill for us to sort of understand what the symbol means, but then also to read what's below that, right? Because even though it says this, there might be additional information like there's another bathroom on the second floor or something like that. But also from a purely quality of life kind of place, like, this is a Tim Hortons poster and it says feature crispy chicken club, and maybe crispy chicken clubs are my absolute favorite, right? And I need to know whether original or spicy are options, but also I need to know when that's on special so that I can go get one. So why is this important? Studies have shown that 70 to 90% of students with significant disabilities do not reach conventional literacy skill development. This study was from 1992, but I have friends that work with adult AAC users, and what they're telling me is that kids, first of all, there's so many more AAC users with 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 a greater variety of different profiles, and people are still not graduating with conventional literacy skills. That's not to say that everybody should or will graduate with conventional literacy skills, but let's get them as close to that as they possibly can, right? We don't want to just sort of say, well, they're not going to be reading Pride and Prejudice, so like we're not even going to try. There's so many layers to literacy skills, and every little bit of it, the more literacy skills we have, the more independent we can be in our communities, the more we can use it recreationally. And somebody was telling me about how there's a study, and the number one indicator for somebody's happiness, how happy they are, is actually their level of literacy. So this is a really, really important skill that we need to work on across environments. All our whole team, everybody needs to be working on this, right? So, language and literacy. I just want you to think about these things for a second, okay? So, across the top here, we have ages. I know that some people in our audience, we have parents of people in high school as well, but we start here at 0, and I've only gone up to 10, but this box really goes into like grade 12, grade 13, and beyond, right? And then we have some grades here. And I just want you to sort of think back. A neurotypical kid is little, okay? So around ages 0, 1, 2, right? We're just learning language. Nobody would expect a kid who is age 0, 1, 2 to be reading yet, right? We're really just focusing on language. When we do read books, we're kind of like pointing at pictures together and we're like, oh, look, there's a duck, there's a dog, and we're just naming things, right? Now, age 3, 4, 5 in preschool and kindergarten, we're in a very, very language rich environment. We're constantly learning new words. We're playing literacy activities. We're participating in songs and rhymes. And we're learning language and sort of like book skills at the same time. And they're kind of supporting each other, right? Now we get to grade 1, 2, 3, right? Ages 6, 7, and 8. And I'm talking about a neurotypical classroom here, right? At this age, kids are learning to read, right? We're doing sight words, we're doing phonological awareness, we're doing all sorts of literacy skills. Now, by grade 4, 5, most neurotypical kids have figured out reading to a certain extent. And we're now into read to learn mode, okay? And that will continue throughout the rest of their education. And usually kids are like 9, 10 when this happens. Now, say we have an AAC user though, right? And say they get their first words in grade 1. It's not unheard of on my caseload to have a kid that's just learning their first words in grade 1. Totally not atypical. But they're, when we think about like neurotypical, like first words are happening around here, and we're really focusing on language learning, right? But say we get our first words here, and the classroom is learning sight words and phonological awareness, right? Where what we need is to just learn language as a whole. It doesn't mean that we're not working on literacy and book skills. It means that there's a mismatch between what I need as a neurodiverse learner and what the classroom might be doing. So this means that the whole team needs to prioritize literacy and emergent literacy strategies and make sure that we're working on those on top of what is going on in the classroom if we want literacy to happen. And I truly believe that literacy to some level is achievable for all of my kiddos, right? We need to start where they are and increase difficulty gradually, but every single one of my kids has the ability to learn and learn literacy specifically. If you like to read, there's a couple books out there that are really sort of the books right now in terms of teaching kids how to read. This is the book that a lot of teachers are reading, and a lot of what literacy instruction is based on for neurotypical kids. It's called The Science of Reading. Now, this Comprehensive Literacy for All, Karen Erickson and David Copenhaver wrote this book. They are the people when it comes to teaching kids with disabilities how to read and write. They are the people that we want to listen to. So they wrote a book. It's amazing. One of my colleagues has said that it like changed his life. So if you'd like to read, this is the book to go to. I'll talk to you a little bit about some of the things that they talk about in the book right now. But this is what I've read so that I can talk to you. So Karen Erickson is the director of the Center for Literacy and Disability Studies at the University of North Carolina. She's very, very qualified to talk about this stuff. She's been doing this for decades. She's also the head of something called Project Core. Now, in the book, there's all sorts of like assessments rolling around. And sometimes, we want to like do the really thorough assessment and get the goals and then work on literacy. And what Karen Erickson says is these are 4 big questions. And if you say no to any of them, then we should be doing daily emergent interventions. Okay, so does your student here, but child, does your child know most of the letters most of the time? Do they actively engage during shared reading? Do they have a means of communication and interaction? That includes AAC. Do they understand that writing involves letters and words? If you say no, or even I don't know to any of those, then we should be doing daily emergent interventions. Okay? So, well, we don't need to talk about that. So the world is full of barriers, right? The world is set up for neurotypical people, and you're going to encounter barriers everywhere you go. Or more specifically, your child is going to encounter barriers everywhere they go. So providing them with literacy instruction and therefore literacy skills is just one way that they're going to smash down these barriers and be able to be independent in their community as adults. So what's going on in schools? There's a consultant named Vicki Rothstein. She's retired from the Richmond School District, but she has written an assessment called the Snapshot Assessment to Early Literacy Behaviors. And we're using this as a standard sort of across the district now. And we're using these snapshots to sort of track progress across grades. So it's not like we're doing a different assessment depending on who the teacher is. This snapshot will sort of follow the student all through their school. And a lot of the assessments that are out there are for specific grades, and there's none of that here. So if you are getting to like an emergent sort of place and you're in grade 10, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. Everybody is on their own trajectory. And so I really like this assessment because it looks at so many different skills. It looks at skills before we're even getting to letters and stuff, which we'll talk about shortly. And so, yeah, this will follow your student along and track their progress. So what are the parts of a comprehensive literacy program? We want to make sure that everybody has a comprehensive literacy program. That means that there's a whole bunch of different parts to it. We want to make sure that we're talking about phonological awareness, print awareness, sight word recognition, reading comprehension, literacy interactions, motivation and interest, and writing. That's a lot of different parts. Now, for a neurotypical kid, we might only work on these 4 plus the writing. But for AAC users, we do need to put a little bit more thought into, for example, literacy interactions, because they may be using an alternate mode of communication, right? So for some kids, neurotypical kids, they might be like pointing at pictures, and that's what people envision. But what if pointing is not an option? Right? What if my hand function is not great and I can't point? What if I have an unconventional way of pointing, and we just need to be aware of that? And also, some kids might be like, ooh, that's really cool. Well, we need to make sure that those kinds of expressions are in the talker so that they can also have those types of interactions. Same thing with writing. So for neurotypical kids, we're looking at like pencil to paper often, and before we even get to typing. But for an AAC user, sometimes they're using AAC because the physical output piece of it is tricky as well. So we can also look at using talkers to support writing, and also keyboards to support writing and that kind of stuff. And that can help with the smashing of the barriers as well. Okay, so here's a zoomed in picture of the snapshot. So I would say that this transitional sort of area is kindergarten, right? But a lot of my AAC user friends are kind of more in this like early emergent area or this like later emergent area, and there's nothing wrong with that. So for example, we're looking at motivation and interest in reading. So we're starting with attends for very brief periods of time during literacy related activities, selects books or other literacy items from choices, beginning to show awareness and interest in books. And so, these are all literacy based goals that we would start with before we get to, say, chooses books and reads or listens independently, right? Like, so there's a whole bunch of skills in between there. We're not going to look at the whole thing. And the thing that I really like most about the snapshot is that we can get a little sort of line grid to track progress. And then all kids, right? If we're providing the instruction, we'll see progress. And it might be that, only one of the things made progress. That's okay, right? But it could be that the whole thing made progress. It could be that we made tons of progress in one area and a little bit of progress in another area. And all of those things are totally fine. The point is that we need to start trying. So what does this mean for home? When we think about books and the types of books that we're reading with kids, we want to make sure we have a little bit of a mix in their like personal library. So we want to make sure, that we have books that are read to the child that are at or slightly above their comprehension level. We want to make sure that we have some books that we read with them, so it's at their reading level, and they're able to read about 90% with accuracy. And then we want to make sure that we have some books that are read by the kid at their independent reading level. Now, as a family, you might not have a good idea of like what is their reading level? What is 98%? What is 90%? So it might be that the school is reading with the student, right? And they're learning the book. It starts at 90%, but then as we get to like 98 to 100%, then the book comes home, right? So we don't expect you to necessarily like find the books at an appropriate instructional level, right? Like that's work that the school can do. But when they say, hey, can you read this at home? That's also a really important piece, right? And when we say read, we're actually talking about the letters and words that are in the book. So what can I do at home? First of all, one of the things we work on is motivation, right? And so sometimes a lot of families will say, my kid does not like to read, right? But what we actually, I mentioned Vicki Rothstein earlier. We actually did a pilot project with her, and we picked our trickiest kids on our caseload, and many of them, their parents said, this child does not like to read. And what we've found actually is even the kids that don't like to read like to look at pictures of themselves. So we started with like custom books, photo albums for a lot of our kids that included themselves and their favorite people and their favorite things. And that was actually a really, really great place for those kids to start. Now, what we would do is, just a photo, it's a book, but it's not literacy, right? We're not talking about words and letters and things like that. But, even just putting an address label on that photo, like say you print them off on your printer or like print them off at London Drugs or whatever, you could just add a address label to it and very neatly write a word in there. And now this is a literacy activity, right? Swing, park, mom, cake, right? Now we have a literacy activity. Now I want to point something out to you. See how here in mom, we have a capital M, right? Now the capital M is there because it should be there. In the other ones, we don't have a capital because we don't want to teach the capital. Like a lot of our kids are really good with detail and things like that. And so we don't want to put the capital on swing because it wouldn't necessarily have the capital. Usually the word swing is kind of not at the beginning of the sentence, so it probably won't have a capital, right? A word like mom is kind of like a name, so it does have the capital. So that's just one thing to keep in mind. But print off your pictures, add words to it, and then suddenly you have a literacy activity. There's a lot of different kinds of literacy materials. You don't just have to look at books. So you can have games, you can have menus. I don't know if you have kids that like Lego, but there's something called Lego Magazine that I think is free. You just have to like sign up for it. And it's a slightly more sort of like grown up thing too, right? Rather than looking at like Caillou books and stuff like that. So there's Lego Magazine signage that's out in the community. You can talk about the signs that you drive past and look at. Say you're in like a rec center and you're looking for the pool, right? You are probably already looking at the sign to figure out which direction you need to go for the pool. You can actually say, hey, we're looking for the word pool. Pool starts with P. Okay, let's find the P on the sign, right? And look at it together like that, rather than just sort of like passing by it. So just taking an extra second to point that out is really is working on literacy as well. You can also do the same with like a menu. Say you're in um, Browns. So you're in Browns and you're like your favorite restaurant is Browns and you're looking at the menu and you know that your kid um loves fries. So you might say, okay, let's find the word fries on the menu. So we need to look for the f sound. The f sound looks like this. And like you might look at the menu and see if you can find it together. These things are not, you're not spending an hour doing that. It might take you an extra 5 minutes to do that. Yes, absolutely. But if it's there, this is just one way that you can work on these things. Instruction manuals. I saw somebody just log in. Her son really likes elevators, and so I said, like, would he like to read an instruction manual about elevators? Maybe. Oh, you're back. Um, Also, we have here recipes. Recipes require literacy, and so you could also be looking at those together if you like to do that. There's these great nonfiction books. A lot of the kids that I work with prefer nonfiction books over fiction books, and National Geographic's Kids specifically has these like nonfiction books with really low language. And so those are really great as well. But also calendars. A lot of families have calendars and they kind of like use them, but then don't show them to kids, right? Um, Even though you might not have picture supports, you might start looking at the calendar together to say, see, in my calendar, it says, we're going to swimming today because it's Saturday, and saying it says Saturday at the top and it says swimming right here. And just sort of like taking a second to look at these things together. These are all things that you can do to start working on literacy at home. So, who chooses what we're reading about? I think that there's a lot of times in kids' lives where they just don't get to choose. Like, I don't know about your household, but at dinner time you get what you get, right? Like I made curry, we're all having curry today. So, but there are times when they can choose. So, like, what socks are you gonna wear? What snack do you want me to put in your lunch kit? I think that literacy is also one of those times where kids should really be provided with choice, right? And it could be that the choices are very similar because they like only similar books. It could be that you're trying to introduce a new type of literacy activity. But rather than saying, here you go, you're going to read a book, saying, here's your book basket or there's your bookshelf, let's pick a book together. What do you want to read? Then that's great. If there's if you have a specific agenda, sometimes there's an agenda and there's like a social story we have to read or something, then I like to take turns. So I would say, I'm going to pick this book. What book do you choose? Right. So that you can sort of get your choice in there as well. So these are some goals from the snapshot assessment, and motivation and interest is for sure something that you can be working on at home. So for an early emergent reader, we would want them to show interest during literacy interactions, and in order for them to show interest during the in order for them to show interest during the literacy interactions, you have to have interesting stuff. So if I come over with a dictionary and they don't show interest, that's not their fault. That's my fault, right? So I need to figure out what they want to read about. As a parent, often you have a sense of the things that they like. So pick literacy materials that fit things that your kid likes, okay? Um, and we want them to have focused attention during literacy interactions. Today, that might look like a fleeting sort of like I looked at it while I'm running past, right? But as we go along, we might see more and more focused attention. That's totally normal. But for a kid who hasn't had a lot of success with literacy, I do expect that their attention will be quite short. Now, if you're like, my child is already doing those things, then you're ready for the next stage. If your child is not yet doing those things, work on those things first. Okay. Now, later emergent skills, sustaining attention during literacy interactions, and selecting a book when choices are presented. So again, these should sound like things that you can totally work on at home. Providing choice and providing interesting stuff. Think about how your child makes choices. Sometimes kids are able to be like, that one, that is my choice. Or they might just take it and indicate their choice. That's okay too. But sometimes, especially when kids haven't been really provided with a lot of choice, then that's something we also need to work on. Book handling is also something we work on a lot. Hold on, I'm just going to reach over here and pick up a book. This book today that I have is a narwhal and jelly book. I don't know if you know these books. So a lot of the time we're afraid that kids are going to rip books, right? Or crush them or do something to them. And so a lot of the time the adult holds the book. But when we do that, there's a lot of things about books that we might not be able to learn. So I'm going to back up a bit. So I might have a book, and if I'm always handing the book like this, or if I'm always holding the book, or if I'm giving the book always like this, then a child might not learn that there's a right way up, right? So we need to talk about, oh no, the book is upside down. I need to turn the book. I need to turn the book. I might even have a talker and model turn, right? I might be like, okay, so let's open the book. And where should I start reading? There's so many words. Do I start reading here? No, that's not right. We need to start way over here. And then as I read, I'm going to say, is that anything like mashed waffles? I don't know what mashed waffles are. Now I need to read this book to figure that out. But those are all sort of book handling and print awareness sort of goals. And when we think about the classroom environment, right, this is kind of stuff that's happening in here. Kids are sorting out like the upside downness, the left to right around this age. But if your child is up here chronologically, then sometimes schools forget to teach that. We're trying to change that with the snapshot, but sometimes we need to be like, remember, they might not know these things. And other things are like what's on the front page. So this says, says, oh, narwhal is crossed off. It says peanut butter and jelly by Ben Clanton. So Ben Clanton is the guy who wrote the book. Again, this is stuff that's going on in here, but if your child is chronologically over here, we just need to remind ourselves that that's something we need to talk about. Okay, so early book handling goals. Orienting the book right side up. So talking about, oh no, we need to turn, oh no, we need to turn it around, right? Turning pages front to back. In the beginning, it's totally normal for kids to just explore the book back and forth. And I think that that's actually a really, really great thing. And you might just talk about the pictures, right? If we can go front to back, we might be like, yes, that's the next page. Let's go to the next page and really reinforce that. And talking about the pictures, not even worrying about the words initially, right? We're just talking about what do you see in the pictures. And then for later emergent kiddos, we would want to talk about the title, the author, following print directionality, paying attention to both pictures and words, and print in the environment. Again, totally doable at home. And who holds the book? You should know the answer by now. I try to give books to the kid who's learning to read. Okay, so I know we talked about a lot. I think that, when we think about that slide that had a whole bunch of different parts of literacy, there's some of that I don't expect to happen at home, like the phonological awareness, the phonics kind of stuff. They're doing that at school, or at least in an emergent kind of way, right? Like before we even get to letters, there's other skills that we would need to talk about before that, and that's captured in the snapshot. So what you can do, it's really nice that we have an LST here, actually. What we can do is continue to talk to your school, right, and your LST, and figure out what is it that I can do at home. They recommend I think they recommend 60 to 90 minutes of literacy instruction a day. And when you think about a school day, it's actually not that long, right? We have to go to the bathroom, we have to eat, we have to have social opportunities, right? Inclusive education sort of opportunities, and we also need time to regulate ourselves. So, so schools are doing their best in terms of working literacy activities in, but it's really helpful to have families do it as well so that we can get to those 60 to 90 minutes. We also want to make sure that, things continue to happen over the weekend. And, when you look at signs together, when you look at cereal boxes together in the grocery store, all of those things count as literacy and functional literacy that's really meaningful to your child. And so I really, really encourage you to sort of just take an extra second when you're doing those things. Do you have any questions?